About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free. Let's go, let's be
Improved by a whole grade. I've improved. Improved.
By a whole grade.
By a whole grade.
By a whole grade.
My teacher isn't just Mr. Maddock. It's a whole teaching team made up of James, Mike and Marta.
My classroom's all about doing and applying. My days standing at the front of the classroom with a PowerPoint are long gone.
I master every concept by learning at my own pace.
I spend 100% of my class time interacting and supporting individual students.
I move on only when the moment is right for me, not the whole class.
I know what each and every student is mastering and struggling on at every moment.
I know exactly what I need to learn next, and I can go back and review material at any time.
I spend my teaching time supporting and inspiring, not planning, delivering and marking.
I can learn from anywhere at any time.
I can switch off when school closes, knowing they are learning from the best.
My teacher has my homework marked before I get to class.
I set every piece of homework at the start of the year.
I'm 2 weeks ahead of my expected progress.
I can track everyone's progress with a swipe of a finger.
I can track my own progress and set my own targets.
I now have time to focus on developing the skills of every learner in my classroom.
I know exactly what it means to explain, evaluate and analyse, and I'm not afraid of any exam.
My lessons are now far more about the skills and the application, not just the content itself.
I've completely remodeled what it means to be a teacher in my classroom.
How's that? Yep. Now we've got sound. Well, I'll say that again. Good afternoon, everybody. This, by the way, means, just in case it ever happens again, this means, wait, we screwed up. So I hope you got that signal and that message in. Yeah, so it always helps if you actually switch the audio. I don't know if I can get it in the picture without pulling. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to pull cables up. We have like a big mad mixer thing just here. I might show it to you later. and basically we'd connected the video fine, but we hadn't connected the audio properly. So therefore it doesn't work. Anyway, that's that. So welcome to the session. It's Wednesday. I don't remember the date. It must be 23rd because I'm at an event tomorrow, which is the 24th over in Norfolk. So today's the 23rd. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We are doing leadership for A-level PE, all exam boards. We are covering material today which is relevant for all exam boards. What that does mean, I'll mention this again to you in a moment, we are cutting out a couple of bits, especially the bit I wanted to think about is any of you that are looking at leadership theories, trait, that great man theory, social learning, interactionism. We're not covering that in this session, so you guys need to cover that elsewhere. Make sure you do. And there's a couple of other bits and bobs for some of you as well. Secondly, you need to interact with the show, please. So down here are your notes pages. You can obviously print those and get those out. If you're in a classroom in the live show, you've probably already got those. If you're taking this on demand, the notes pages are in the description. Secondly, we'd like you to answer some questions with us, and Marta's going to quickly describe this process to us.
Yes, so if you want to answer a question for us, you need to go to
it's for them, really.
Well, for you, that is true. You need to go to theeverlearner.com, go on to news. You'll have to dig a little bit deep because we've made a lot of announcements and lots of things, and it's here, interactive questions. You need to click on here, find the session here, leadership, and here is your question. Answer the question and click on submit.
Okay, cool. And we do like receiving those, folks, and we do put them out. When we get nice answers, we do share those out with the community, so do put some time in. I've said before, teachers, get your students putting those answers in. It's really valuable to do that, and we will feed back to them as well. Now, thirdly, can I ask you all to please subscribe to the YouTube channel? It is important. Please do. We've had a great uptake of subscribership so far. We need more. Please get on with it and do that for us. Fourthly, I don't know what order I'm now in. We'd also like you to send us your revision break photo. So Martha's going to quickly show you that, how you can do that on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Please give us that hashtag revision break. Some of you have been super kind of sending in some fun things, and we like seeing them and we like sharing them. It's kind of a bit, it's quite lonely doing this thing in the studio all by ourselves. We're kind of used to teaching. We like to see who we're teaching and who we're working with. So please do send appropriate photos via those social media routes, and if they're appropriate, we will put them out on the stream. Marta, am I forgetting anything?
Don't think so.
No. Okay, so today we are, as I said before, we're looking at leadership. There's quite a bit of note taking to do. There's a bit of drawing to do. There's quite a bit of annotation. Can I emphasize to you today the concept of the key word, the key subject term? That's the thing that you should be really looking to pick up on this session. I'm going to use very deliberately a lot of key language and subject terminology. Make sure you are identifying that. How it works for me, I think if I've got a good example here. Let me see if I can show you how it works for me. I'm a big one for colours. I don't know how well this is going to come across to you, but I'm a big one for sort of coloured stuff. I'm going to see if I can show you some other aspects of my notes. Here's another good example. This is some notes I'm making at the moment about a book I'm reading in preparation for the book I'm going to be writing over the summer. Oh, there's an announcement. So things like, colours for highlights of keywords, things like that, having tidy, organised notes. This stuff's important. When I was a teenager, I was rubbish at it. Now I'm almost kind of obsessive with it. In fact, near me, I have my coloured, I don't know how well you can see this, but I have my coloured pens all near me, so that these are all different colours, so that I can make really pretty notes and make it all nice and intuitive. It helps when you come to read it and remember it. I don't know why I'm saying all this. Let's get on with some leadership. Marta, are we ready?
Yeah, we are ready.
Okay, let's get on with it.
Okay, so this leadership topic is a pretty big one, and I kind of have to start with a bit of bad news, really. I'm going to omit two fairly significant sections from this session that we're going to do today. So those are leadership theory, which we're not going to address directly, and for those of you that study Fiedler's contingency model, we're not going to look at that in here. So the reason for that is we are looking for unified and shared content across the different exam boards. So if you do on your exam board study either Fiedler, and for a lot of you study the theories of leadership, I encourage you to look at that material in addition to this session. Of course, we have all of that covered on the EverLearner.com. You should be using it now. All that being said, let's focus on our first principle of leadership, okay? And that is, where are leaders appointed from? So let's make it really, really clear. We are talking here about the appointment of leaders, which I'm going to make particularly clear by spelling it correctly. The appointment of leaders, okay? So we're interested in that concept first of all, and we've got two broad methodologies here. Whenever I sort of teach this or remind myself of this idea, I always feel that this is kind of a limited description of the different ways by which a leader could become a leader in a group, okay? But nevertheless, we are talking about the appointment of leaders. So first, let's have a look at the notion of the prescribed leader. I would like you guys to have it really clear that this is someone who is assigned to a group. Okay, so as a result of that, we consider this to be an external kind of appointment. Okay, an external kind of appointment. Given, a coach or a captain or someone who has even just leadership behaviours being brought in from another group or from another setting to this group. So on that basis, we have got we are effectively placing leadership skills into an existing group. Okay, and that, of course, can be very advantageous, but it can also cause certain risks. So let's have a look at some of the factors which we might want to consider in relation to this. Well, first of all, we tend to find this when some kind of transformation is required. Okay, now transformation is often required because things aren't going very well. I'm not going to talk about favourableness here. I'm talking about a team or an athlete or something not getting the results that they want or need to have. So that's where sort of a model of transformation or change would come from. And what we find often is when you introduce a new coaching structure or a new leadership structure to an existing group, the initial impact can be very positive because it's that sort of notion of something new. A change is as good as a break kind of concept, right? But the question we would ask about this is that transformation, is it permanent? Is it permanent? Or is it temporary? And you can probably reflect on lots of examples where introducing a new leader or leadership group to a team has had positive influence, but it's been a very temporary factor. Other points we'd make, we would do this when there was what we'd describe as a lack of identity in the group. Okay, have a think about that in the group. So we would appoint leadership externally, prescribe it, because there's a lack of identity in the group, or it could be the identity that the group has is not favourable, is not the one that is desired. We also find that leaders are prescribed when there is a need for new skills. Okay, so when something new needs to come into a group, you'll often find the leadership is prescribed externally, need for new skills. And the other thing we could say, of course, is we would prescribe a leader because there's a lack of experience in the group. So if we are looking to appoint leaders from within the group, more of which in a second, if there's a lack of experience in that group, sometimes the team will appoint that leader from external sources. And of course, we can make this additional point here. If there's a need for new skills, there may well be a lack of skills in the group. Okay? So that gives us kind of a picture of why something like someone with leadership skills or someone who's going to become kind of a team leader, a captain, a coach, these kind of leadership roles and behaviours would be prescribed as the appointment from external sources. Now, the emergent side is, of course, quite different. We are talking about someone who emerges from within. Okay, someone who begins to exhibit the behaviours of leadership and effectively takes on a leadership role. You can consider this, if you like, in certain circumstances, a model of promotion. Someone who's an existing member of the group goes on to take part in that group or take a more significant position in the group. So we can consider it a model of of promotion. So why would we do this? Well, we would have things like continued identity. So if a group and a team is performing with an identity which is desirable and the structure, the group wants continuity, then the leader is likely to be emergent from that group. As I mentioned before, it creates a career path for the members of the group. This depends on the level of the sport, of course, but the career path in the sense that, okay, I'm another of the performers or the team members now, but if I behave in the following ways, I could become a leader, a coach, whatever, in the future. And as a result of that, it provides aspiration. And what we mean by that is people look to what is the next step for them, above them. And as we said before, key word, I've kind of got it here with continued, but we're looking for the notion of continuity. And we can, of course, I mean, we can take all of these points over here and we can say, right, we don't need new skills. We've got the skills in the group. We've got the experience in the group. We could look at all those in reverse, of course, for emergent leader, but we've got prescribed emergent leaders being appointed in this way. So it's useful to get to grips with that. Now, what we do have to do here is look in detail at leadership styles. Note, please, folks, this is styles, not theories. If you get a question in your exam because you are studying leadership theories as part of your component, you have to look at instinct theory, great man theory, sorry. You've got to look at, in terms of trait theory, you've got to look at social learning theory, and you've got to look at interactionism, as we've looked at in numerous other cases, not least with personality. So you need to do that if it's the question about leadership theory. What we're doing is about leadership styles. And let me tell you, the key thing about leadership styles is they can be, or at least they should be, flexible. And why would a leader potentially show all kinds of different behaviours? To suit the environment. To suit the environment. Okay? So we are going to look at 3 different styles, and it's not like we're saying every individual is one or the other. First of all, these can often merge and overlap, and the great leader will be flexible between those different styles of leadership. So you can see there, we're going to look at autocracy first, or the autocratic methodology. I've got to choose my colours carefully because I'm going to go from sort of white to black. So let me choose that one, see how this goes. So first of all, I'd like you guys to pick up that this is what we would call a task-oriented methodology. Okay, what we mean by that is that the objective of the leadership style is to get the job done. Okay, so let's put that term in there, get the job done. So as we'll see in a moment when we look at democracy or democratic style, we're assuming here that success is built on good relationship. The autocratic style doesn't really value that. Okay, so what does the leader value? The leader values decisions. Okay, so the leader values decisions. Okay, that's an interesting concept, and there will be in comparison to the other models we're going to look at, there will be less consulting with members. Okay, so the members themselves, remember, members are any member of the group. It can be performers, but it can be other members too. They would not be broadly consulted within an autocratic model. So you should be starting to generate a picture of an individual who takes all the decisions on the behalf of the group and instructs and commands and tells the group what they are going to be doing. Reflecting your own experiences when that is effective, when that is necessary. Reflecting your own experiences when that's been less so. And you can probably come up with different answers to those questions. So we can also say other key things we want to get into our answers. We are talking about not sharing responsibility. So the responsibility, in other words, is centralized. Responsibility is centralized on the leader. And as we've said already, the leader makes all decisions. Now, all's an interesting word. You could, I suppose, have something in between these models, which was kind of, this would be most decisions at this point here. But you take my point, in the extreme example, we've got the leader making all decisions. The leader is not interested. The leader is not interested in relationships. Okay, not interested in relationships. Okay, as we said before, it's about getting the job done. So they're not interested in being popular. They're not interested in being liked. They're not interested in putting smiles on people's faces unless it gets the job done, right? If it gets the job done, then great, but it's got to get the job done. So not so interested in a relationship. They provide a strong, clear message. Okay, so they provide a strong, clear message, which, I suppose in many ways is useful. We also have the notion that the leader appears confident. They may not be, by the way, but they will appear confident. And this develops conformity. Conformity is people following that strong, clear message. In other words, people doing as they're told. Okay, now, a couple of additional points. It works well with large groups. You may want to reflect on things like, go back to your Year 8 PE lessons when there was a wet weather lesson, goodness, and all of the all of the students are in the sports hall and the gym together, not much space, you might reflect on the PE teacher in that context being quite sort of commanding, potentially, telling you exactly what you needed to do. Okay, and that would be because we have large numbers, often in a small space, and it works well with dangerous activities. If a group, or if if you're in a if people are practicing some like inversions in trampolining for the first time, or it's javelin throwing or this kind of thing, then autocracy is pretty likely in truth. Okay, so we've got those kinds of models. Now, how does that compare with something like a democratic, or what we're now going to call a person-oriented model? I have also seen it called a social-oriented model, by the way. So we're saying here that success is built on good personal relationships. Okay, so that's quite different, right? So we've got a model here where the leader is thinking, okay, if we want to get success, we have to make people feel good. We have to get people communicating. We have to get people believing what we're doing. It all makes common sense, but what are the circumstances where that's going to be better than the autocratic style? That's what you guys need to reflect on. So it works if there's time. If there is time. So you might want to think about this model. It does take time to get the best possible performance, whereas the autocratic route, perhaps some people can argue, is a direct route to better performance very quickly, but it might be temporary because people might fall out of love with that model, perhaps. It helps to develop opinions. Okay, so if that's the desire, then a democratic person-oriented structure is going to work. It also develops ownership, and that's a really important point. Develops ownership. Okay, develops ownership. People actually wanting to contribute, wanting to commit, wanting to support, wanting to work harder, wanting to train regularly. Perhaps it produces that kind of outcome. We often find that it suits experienced athletes. Now, not all would agree with that, but generally speaking, it suits experienced athletes. And it works well when the group is friendly. Okay, so that makes sense because obviously we're developing personal relationships, lots of communication. Now, we also want to say here, and I always flinch at saying this, it is argued that the autocratic style is preferred by men, and it is argued that the democratic style is preferred by women. But that is such a generalization that it makes the statement close to ludicrous. But some people, and it might even be a mark in your exam, would suggest to you that autocratic styles are preferred by men and democratic styles are preferred by women. So I'm incorporating that into what I'm writing on this canvas. Okay, you can interpret that in any way you see fit. For me, it's kind of a bit of a... if you generalize to that degree, the generalization ends up not meaning very much in my world, in my opinion. But if it gets you a mark, then perhaps we need to honour that and put it in here. Now, laissez-faire style, okay, which first of all, you've got to learn how to spell. But the laissez-faire style, excuse me, actually means leave to make. Okay, it doesn't have a very good translation, I suppose, but leave to make. In other words, we're talking about the leader here who lets things happen. So this is where the leader takes a bit of a backward step. They allow things to develop organically and naturally. So we'd say here the leader stands aside. Leader stands aside. We're talking about a loss of group direction potentially. So if we do use this laissez-faire model, and by the way, it's not as corrupt and pointless as people think it is, but if we do it, we can potentially suffer a loss of group direction. We can also say that there will tend to be a lack of guidance. That's assuming a leader doesn't emerge from that group, of course. A lack of guidance. And it's argued that people give up more easily because there's a lack of direction. People give up more easily. So we're kind of demonizing that model to some degree. But the point I would make to you again, and we're going to look at this specific point when we look at Shaladrai shortly, is that this continuum of behaviours, the point is not that that captain, whoever, is always at this point on the continuum. It's that they have the capacity, even in a particular few moments, to move up and down that continuum, okay? To spot what in the moment makes one methodology better than the other and use it. There are times where autocracy is absolutely necessary. If you are working with 10-year-olds throwing a javelin for the first time, you need to be autocratic to keep those people safe, right? However, if at the next PE lesson you'll look at developing problem solving and creative skills with the same bunch of 10-year-olds, then of course the leadership model there is going to be far more democratic, or even laissez-faire, to bring out those ideas within that group. So the circumstances dictate that. And it can also be that we go from the very formal setting of being in a competition where autocracy perhaps is required by the captain, the leader, the coach, whatever. And then afterwards, an hour afterwards, we go into a much more democratic model because we're reviewing what happened, we're discussing it, we're generating different ideas, we're sharing our experiences. So it's not like one methodology is better than the other. Okay, I'm going on too long. Let's have a little look at some questions. We've got here, Julie is the club captain of her netball team. Good netball, of course, and works closely with the coach to ensure good leadership is shown at all times. Makes sense. Explain why. Remind yourself. We really need because in here. For explaining why, we should be using because. We may use therefore, comma at the start of a sentence. We may use this means at the start of a sentence. This kind of language is explaining why. Explaining why Julie might choose a task-oriented style of leadership in some situations. So, task-oriented, remember, is that autocratic style. Okay, so why would she choose that? Now, I've prepared my answer in advance. Otherwise, it would be too long here. You guys can pause this both on the live stream and of course on demand, and you can look at this in as much detail as you want to. I'm going to give you the overall picture and then you can review it. So, what have we got here? This is because, notice I'm not introducing my answer. I'm not sort of saying things like, a netball captain needs to show task-oriented leadership in some situations. No, don't bother. It's pointless. Don't write that. You're just wasting space. You're wasting time. Just get on with answering it. This is because task orientation, or, and here's my key language. By the way, I should have said that. Let me just actually clarify that. Black is just what I'm going to call words. I'm going to try and get as few of those as possible. Orange is the skill. Okay, in this case, explaining why. Green is the answer, or the content, or the key language. Okay, that's how I'm structuring my answer now. Red is the marking. This is because, straight into it, task orientation, or, given the other name for it, autocracy, means, remember I said this means getting the job done. So that's why she's going to do it by is typically explaining a how language, by Julie making all the decisions without consulting the members. Okay, so we've got 4 pieces of information there, but I'm going to give a sub-max of 3. Why? Because I've not yet addressed why it's relevant in some situations. Okay, so I'm going to give a sub-max. I'm saying what this task orientation is, and I have to pick up my other mark. Let's have a look. The reason for this could be that Julie wants to appear confident. Okay, so in some situations, and because her group is large. So the group is large, that's the situation, and she's getting that outcome with that large group. Okay, we could have said the group prefers autocracy. We could have said the group has had a history of not responding well to democracy. That's the situation. But I'm saying in this situation the group is large, so therefore I get my 4th mark. Everything in green there is potentially a correct answer to that question. Let's move on. Julie's netball club has chosen to appoint a new head coach and has chosen a candidate from outside of the club. So we know this is a prescribed leader. Justify the club's decision to appoint a prescribed leader. So justify could be things like the reason is, one possibility. This is language we're going to be using. This is because, but just because on its own again. The reason, and another reason, one suggestion is this kind of language is justifying. Okay, so let's have a little look. The reason for this, there you go. The reason for this could be that they needed a new set of skills. So here's my answer, new set of skills. Gets me a mark, and I'm justifying. I'm saying why they would have done it. Or because, so this is because, The required skills were not evident in the group. Okay, so that's almost the same point. So I'm not going to give myself that one. Because of this, the current coach may have lacked the experience. Okay, so the coaching team that remains lacks experience. Thus, an external appointment was necessary. Okay, let's see if I've got one more bit. Or am I done at that point? I'm sure I've got one more bit here. Hang on a second. Another reason is the club wanted to change identity. And there I've got my max. Okay, but we've got a bit more of the group. By introducing a new person with new ideas would also be relevant content in this answer. So the key thing I would encourage you guys to draw out of that is, what the hell does justify mean? It's very close, of course, to what does explain why mean. They're very closely related. So I would say to you, going into your exams, if you have those words clear, it's going to help you get your content down on the page in a relevant structure. Notice I'm never giving myself a mark for because or the reason for this or another because there. But what it's doing, it's making me write the structure which has been asked for. So I'm saying, so if I'm explaining why and I write because in my answer, it's forcing me to do a because statement. So-and-so happened because of the following points. Okay? If you don't do that, you might just end up writing so-and-so happens. That's describing or summarising. And I've been asked to explain why, so I should be subtle and sensitive enough to that instruction to be able to explain why, or justify, or indeed evaluate, whatever. So for me, it's a super useful structure. If you're not using the roadmap, which by the way now is completely free, you should be. Okay, go and download it from the EverLearner.com. The roadmap, it's free. Why wouldn't you? Okay, so it's available. Get it used. It will improve how you interpret exam questions. Really, guys, really, it will make a difference. The ideal situation is you use it over a long period of time. Exams are close, and of course, you guys need to get this clarified. But it helps. Come and have a look at it.
back. Good. I hope you had a good little break. I did. In my break, just not that I want to get obsessive about this, but I got my 3 of my favourite possessions in the world out. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. I'm going to try and get really close to the camera. This is an orange pen, which is extremely close to being finished completely. You see how close that is to being finished? This is a pink in exactly the same condition, and this is a green when in exactly the same condition. When I finish these pens, these are going to be like pride of possession for me. Who do you know that completely uses up a green, a pink, and an orange pen, and let alone sort of like a manly type like me?
It's especially pink and orange, I would say.
I
mean, green, there's probably lots of schools up and down the country using frantically using that green pen.
Well, I don't use the green pen, but of course the guys who just took that. So you guys out there just took that session. You know how I use my green and my orange, because my orange is like my skills pen, like my explaining why, evaluating pen. You know, I use the language of the skill that way, and my green is like correct terminology in my answers. I do it all the time. I don't know. Look, you don't have to do it like me. I'm just trying to tell you what my if you look here, that's just an example of like answers that I'm not even sure I remember what's on the other page, but you get the idea. You get the idea that I just want to normalize the idea of taking good quality notes and taking pride in your work, to be honest. You know, it's something that many students do really, really well, but a lot of students could do it a lot better. Taking pride in your work is really important. Really, really important. If you're going to learn it and you're going to put time into it, you should value it, and you should do it properly. You should feel good about it. Anyway, I'll stop going on. Questions?
Good. Yes, we've got a couple of questions. First one, is laissez-faire,
well pronounced,
or laissez-faire, just lazy leadership, or is it carefully considered?
Okay, it can be both. So I think the way we tend to present it is kind of lazy leadership, like someone's not bothering. That's kind of like the quintessential way we tend to describe it to students. Students probably learn it within that framework. But I think carefully considered, it can be a very, very, very effective model at developing things like problem solving, exploration, developing ownership, those sorts of notions. But of course it can't be the whole. It has to be very, very temporary. So a laissez-faire style could be really, really effective if used in small deliberate elements, where it's almost like, you know, this might be a really bad example. I literally just thought of it. You've got 3 coaches and a head coach in a planning meeting for a selection, and the coach might say, you know, that there's disagreement with the outcome of who's going to be selected and why, and the coach says to her 3 coaches, to her 3 assistant coaches, says, right, this is what I want, this is the outcome, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, you guys settle it and come back to me with the solution, and then they leave them to it. Now that, you could say that's quite autocratic at that moment, but by leaving that scenario, she's using a laissez-faire approach to that, to those next few moments. So that would be an example of perhaps when it's used. It depends on the people, right? But it could be used well in something like that.
Okay. Next question is, are all 3 forms of leadership equally valid, or is one generally more effective?
Okay, so I would put that into a temporal frame. When we say temporal, we mean timely. If you did our anticipation stuff the other day, you'll know temporal anticipation is based around time. So I would say that autocracy has been proven to be very, very effective in the short term. So by having very clear instructions, very clear, strong message coming from one individual to all, that can be temporarily very, very effective at getting a specific outcome. So autocracy in that sense can be really valuable and the highest impact in that sense. If we're looking at a long-term impact and we're looking at performers developing ownership and leadership skills coming out of the group so they can emerge into the leadership positions, democracy is far democratic or person-oriented processes are much better at developing that. And as I said before, I would argue that laissez-faire style is very, very relevant and useful and effective, but for almost microscopic elements of a leadership style. So I think the short-term win is autocracy can be relevant to that. The long-term ownership using democracy and microscopic elements with laissez-faire, where it's very deliberately placed. Now, those of you that study Fiedler and his contingency model, you guys know that in a highly favourable and a highly unfavourable situation, autocracy is said to be most effective. You know, you've got this sweeping curve. And democracy is said to be most effective in a moderately favourable situation. The reason I didn't give the answer at the start of that is that I think 3 out of the 4 examples don't study that model. So for those of you who do, I can't remember which one it is now off the top of my head, which example it is. But if you do study that, then Fiedler would have answered it that way. Highly favourable, highly unfavourable situations use autocracy. Moderately favourable situations is better to use democracy.
Fascinating.
Thanks.
Great. And then Bethany wants us to give a sporting...
Bethany.
Yes, Bethany. Wants us to give us, or want you to give a sporting example for each leadership style. You've already given a sort of example about the laissez-faire one. What about the other leadership styles?
Okay, they're so endless, these, that you could come up with anything. So I'm gonna choose a quintessential autocratic scenario. I think I mentioned it a couple of times just now, and that would be you have a PE teacher or a coach has a group of athletes lined up with a throwing implement like a javelin or a shot, and they say 3, 2, 1, throw, and everyone throws together. That's an autocratic methodology, and that teacher, she would then go on to say, and collect, and the performers would walk out. One of them would start a little jog. You walk, because it's that classic thing. You don't run to it. This would be classic examples of autocracy, leadership in sport. In this case, a coaching session would be that way. The other thing you might want to use here is any kind of command from a coach or a captain or a leader type position. Any kind of do this command, imperative use of language would be autocratic. Democratic, I'll use an example. I think I talked about this on one of the shows recently. I was in a change room for our Saturday football team, and we were 2-1 up at half time in an away, 2-0 up at half time in an away game. And what needed to be done was really obvious. We were causing all the damage to our opponent by sitting deep and then using pace to break on the attack, and we scored 2 goals that way. And in the change room, rather than us just telling the players this is what you need to do, which of course would have been autocratic and very direct, we said to the players, look, we could tell you what we need to do, but what do you think? And they said things like, well, when we defend in shape, they're not causing any problems. Good. Okay, when are we causing them problems? Well, we're causing them problems when we break, we win the ball back, we break at speed, and we use good width. And when the other winger arrives in the box late, okay, good. So how are we going to set up now? Well, what we should do, and this is from the play, what we should do is keep our shape, sit deep, and then when we get the opportunity to break, we break in the wide position, so we make sure we get players in the box to support the cross. And that would be a democratic process. And of course, in terms of the value to the player's like, well, not only have they told me to do that, but we have said that's the best way. So the ownership of it becomes more global. Now, it happens to be the message was pretty obvious. If you had a very nuanced, detailed message in 15 minutes, you might want to choose autocracy. But in that example, we used the democratic method to bring the obvious answer out of them, so that they would own it, rather than us just saying, right, you do this, you do that, you do this, because then they don't know why they're doing it. They're just doing it because you've told them to do it. So for understanding, that would be a good democratic example. And we won 2-1. Although we didn't score any more on the break, it was a good win. We were expected to lose that game. We got a 2-1 win away. It's good.
Brilliant. Good. Excellent.
Any others?
No, that's it for now.
Okay, I have no idea what the time is, but I feel it's pressing.
4:30. Yeah.
Okay, we should get on. I'm ready when you guys are.
Yep.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Okay, so you've heard me banging on about leadership already. Let's actually address what leadership is, or at least what the skills are. And I would get those of you that study the leadership theories to consider where these skills come from. I mean, there has been a kind of a broad societal assumption that people have kind of, they have leadership. It's something in people. Many people hold that belief, others less so. I have to say, on a personal level, I'm one that's less so. I think these are behaviours that are developed, or at least responsive to an environment, at least to some degree. That's just my personal opinion. Okay, all that being said, let's have a look. What are we talking about? So we are talking about things like communication skills. I guess that becomes particularly relevant when we look at something like a democratic or person-oriented model. However, one of the purposes of the autocratic model is the clear message. So communication skills is important there as well, of course. And it kind of goes without saying. We are talking about high levels of motivation. Motivation's a really important point. I mean, we always write it as motivation, don't we? They need to be motivated and they need to share that motivation with others. That's absolutely true. One of the things I'm fascinated about in life is about the relationship between self-discipline and motivation. We could make a very strong argument that motivation is very, very temporary, whereas something like self-discipline is actually potentially very, very permanent. So it's something I'd get you to reflect on, but certainly this high motivation is going to be useful to us. Another point. It seems obvious, but we are looking for an individual who shows enthusiasm. Okay, and what we mean by that is that they have energy for the work at hand. They're prepared to put things into the job. They display that approach behaviour all the time. We're also talking about an individual or a team of individuals with, sorry, I meant to write that differently. We're talking about a clear goal or a clear vision for what the group and the team is going to achieve. It's essential that they can communicate that clear goal and that clear vision. Another point, again, especially important for the democratic process, is the skill of empathy. Empathy is the skill of being able to recognize the experiences of others in others when you don't necessarily have that experience yourself. Okay, so empathizing is a useful skill. Understanding why someone is disappointed not to be selected. Understand why someone lost their rag today. Understanding why a performer is not committing as much as you think they should in their training. Trying to understand those things can help to good leadership skills because it can lead to better conversations, I suppose, ultimately. A couple of other points. We're talking about someone who has or had a high technical performance. Okay, it gives credibility to someone, right? That they themselves are able or were able to perform at that level. So a high technical performance is important. There are lots of exceptions to that. And then we've got the notion of charisma. Now, I never know how to describe charisma. It's that sort of notion that people want to listen to that individual, right? They can grab attention. They can capture people. These are amongst some of the skills which we would argue are super important. Are super important for the leadership behaviour and for the. Sorry, guys, I dropped a bit of paper for the leader to actually display. A couple of other additional things. Empathy, of course, leads to caring, which is a nice word you can include in your answers. If you want, vision can lead to something like philosophy. You know, having a playing competition philosophy or an identity we might talk about. We also could add in here the notion of relationships, someone who's capable of building lots of good relationships. Again, the democratic style is particularly relevant for that. And the other point really is just to re-emphasize this notion of high motivation. Often the energy will need to come from the leader, so it's important that we have that. All right, let's move on. We have got this model here, Shaladra. At least that's how I pronounce it. Perhaps you say it differently. Don't be shocked if you see somewhere that it's written Shalandria. I've seen that in numerous places, but I'm using the model Shaladra. Why? It's actually the correct one. So this is an interesting model, and we call it the multi-dimensional model. I'm going to address the entire construct here, and beyond that, we're going to have a look at answering a fairly challenging question about that. So, key things to me that I think we need to do. Let's start with the end in mind. We are looking to derive group satisfaction and group success. We can just simply describe that as better performances. Okay, so if we follow this model, the outcome, according to Shaladra, is better performances. If we get better performances, we're more likely to be successful, the group's more likely to be satisfied, we're more likely to win. Okay, so better performances in that way. But it's not just about winning. I mean, we also look at people committing more, people persevering more, people enjoying it more. You know, that's where that satisfaction point comes in. So we're looking at a model of leadership or a series of behaviors and sensitivities that a leader can adopt to ensure that those things take place. So of course this therefore becomes a very valuable model in sport, right? So let's look at these different things. Let's look at situation first of all. By the situation here, we could be talking about a notion of favourableness. Okay, favourableness. Now, those of you that study Fiedler will know quite a lot about favourableness. Is it high? Is it low? With favourableness, we are talking about the strength of the leader's position, the levels of satisfaction of the group, the difficulty of the situation. The favourableness is the situation. Now, also, don't forget that this could also be practicalities. You know, how many people are in the group? Is it a dangerous activity? Are they men and women? You said there might be a difference earlier, perhaps. These are also the practicalities of the situation. And the key point is this one. Depending on what the situation is, it's going to produce a certain required behavior. So let's just keep this simple. Let's say that our situation is that we have a group of all women, because we have that part of our theory. They are doing a known activity. They're doing a known activity, something they've done before, and they are in a favourable or a moderately favourable situation in a not too large group. Well, what's that going to mean for our required behaviour? Well, in many cases, that's going to mean that the behaviour needs to be democratic. Okay? So in other words, that the leader should be sensitive enough to interpret the environment, the situation, and then recognise that the required behaviour, in the example I gave, a blunt one, would be democratic behaviour. If we change that, working with young males, 10 to 12 years old, in very large groups, doing that javelin throwing thing for the first time, then of course we're going to have a different required behaviour. So let's move on. I'm going to go jump down to the bottom here. Members are the following. They are team members. They are players or athletes. They could be staff. They could even be officials. And by that I'm talking about, chairperson, secretary, treasurer, all those guys, okay? So this is who we mean by the members. And what we're going to find from that group is they're going to have some notion of a preferred behaviour. Now let's assume for a second that let's say we're at a rugby club, let's do a hockey. We're at a hockey club for argument's sake. And the players, the staff that kind of coach, and all of the officials, all of them, in some weird world, or the majority of them, they want an autocratic style. Right? We've had a difficult situation. We lost all our games last season. We need someone to come in and tell us what to do. Okay, so they have an autocratic style. Do you see now? If we look down here, we now have a disagreement, or what we call a dissonance. The required behaviour and the preferred behaviour could be different. Okay, and that, of course, it could lead to problems for the leader, but more importantly, what does it lead to for the leader? The need to be flexible. Okay, the need to be flexible. Now, finally, let's look at the leader characteristics. This could be in relation to their personality. It could be in relation to their experience, their previous success. It could be in relation to something like the strength of their position. Okay, strength of position, again, touching on notions of favourableness again. So the strength of the position. So let's assume for a second that the leader is more of a task-oriented kind of person. That's their personality. Their experience has been in that realm. That's what they've tended to do. And the strength of their position is really strong. So we're saying that their actual behaviour is probably going to be autocratic, or their tendency for behaviour is going to be autocratic, which suits the members, but perhaps the situation requires democracy. What that leads to is what we'd call a dissonant model. A dissonant model. And what we mean by that is that the required behaviour, the actual behaviour, and the preferred behaviour don't all agree. We have one, the required behaviour in the situation, is different to the preferred and the actual. So what does that mean for the leader? Let me write this in big letters. The leader must be flexible. So if you think that leadership behaviours are all one thing, Shaladrai would disagree with you. Shaladrai disagreed, and he would say the best leadership behaviours take into account the situation, the leader's characteristics themselves, and the members, and as a result of that, the leader produces an actual behaviour which is representative of balancing up those pressures. Okay? And if they get the right behaviour, remember, this could be momentary, this could be in two different moments, 2 different seconds. They might display a different style of leadership, shifting from democratic to autocratic to laissez-faire even. And what that's going to produce is a higher level of group satisfaction and group success. Now, if we have all 3 of these all the same, so the situation requires, let's say, democracy, the leader prefers a democratic style, the members prefer a democratic style. We have some words that represent that. When they don't agree, it's dissonant. So you can call them, there's 3 words that I've seen this described as. One is consonant, which is not, in this case, those things that Rachel Riley puts up on Countdown. you can call it congruent and you can call it concordant. All three of those basically mean agreement between those three elements. But the key point is, because this model is dynamic, the situation changes, the members change or experiences change, the leader can be replaced, or you can add other skills into the leader. The situation is dynamic. So what does that mean for the leader? They must be flexible to achieve group success and to achieve group satisfaction. I finished with a flourish of a big red tick. I've scribbled all over that. My mind's kind of betraying me, and I can't remember exactly all the things I've said to make that mess on that screen, but you'll notice that. The only other thing I would say, and it looks awful now, but hopefully yours on your sheet will look better, is just notice that we've got these arrows here. So the situation does, of course, affect the preferred behaviour, because the members are also part of the situation. The members, of course, do influence the required behaviour, because a requirement that a part of the situation is the members' involvement. So just be aware that those are in there. And you'll also see about 8 different versions of this model with arrows pointing in different places, but the basic principle is the same. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at this question. Let me make this slightly bigger, actually, because I like this question. So let's make this slightly bigger. How's that? A little bit better. Oh, so question. Laura, who's our rhythmic goodness, is our rhythmical gymnast. Is that the right way of phrasing that? And also Volta, if you read the notes. Laura's coach is responsible for over 50 elite gymnasts. That's a busy job. Making specific reference to Shaladri's model. So, of course, we're going to bring this back to Shaladri's multidimensional model, aren't we? Because we've been asked to explain why. What did we say before? Because. This means we've also got therefore, comma, as a result, by, through. This is explaining language. Explain why she might choose an autocratic leadership behaviour. She might choose autocratic leadership behaviours during training. So what are the reasons why she might choose autocracy according to Shaladri? That's the question. So let's have a look. And I do want to give examples in my answer here as well, because it's specifically related to Laura's coach, so I should include Laura's coach in my answer. So let's have a little look here. Same rule, black is just kind of words and fluff. Orange is my language that I'm using to think through the skill of explaining why, and the green is the answer. This is because, notice, no introduction. I'm not waffling. I'm not going, Shaladri presented a multidimensional model. It had the so-and-so element. Don't bother. Okay, just answer. This is because the situational characteristics, boom, mark. Okay, so I'm already referring to Shaladri, leads to autocracy being the required behaviour. An example is, so now putting it into Laura's coach's example, that the practice drill is dangerous. Now, I wonder if I get a submax there, because if you think about what I've just done, is I've talked about this part of the model. Okay, so maybe there's a submax there. I can't get any more available. So submax, or involves the entire. Hey, where's that? Why is that down there? I've left you open. Let me get rid of you. So or it involves the entire group, so large numbers. I think I've. So what did I had this here. Goodness me. Our canvas are all based on layers, and of course I was writing on the wrong layer in this case, so apologies. The required behaviour, both these are getting me a mark. We had a dangerous, which got me a mark. It got me my submax, and of course I would get this if I didn't have my submax, but it's about the required behaviours and the situational characteristics, so I can't get my 1 because I've already got my 3. So let's move it on. Next little part. It is also because, I'm just using because again, the member characteristics, so I'm referring to Shaladri's model, actually prefer, okay, so we've got preferred behaviour, prefer the behaviour of autocracy. They like being told to do that extra repetition. Okay, so again, I've got my 3, I've got my submax. Okay, so that's how the coach would do it. They would use an autocratic route because it's preferred by the members. And an example of that would be one more repetition. Okay, nice. Then we've got, finally, this could be because, simply using because again, the leader's characteristics, okay, from Shaladri, are actually that their actual behaviours tend to be autocratic. So again, I've got my 8, I've got my max. Some of you might view this more as a 6-mark question, depending on your exam structures. But I've gone through now the 3 horizontal sections of Shaladra's model. Now, it could be that I get some other sub-maxes in there, but we can go on and we can say, right, let's have a look at this last bit, which was present earlier. If the required preferred and actual behaviours are consonant, congruent, concordant, as autocracy, this will mean, there's my explaining why skill, increased group satisfaction and group success. In other words, they're going to perform better. But I've already got my max 8, and I gave myself an extra. It was actually a 7-mark question. I thought it was an 8, so I got a max earlier. So maybe my sub-maxes would have been 2s, perhaps, rather than 3s. But you take my point. This is where I've answered the entire question. I've made reference to this whole thing, which is now too big on my screen. I've made reference to this the entire thing and given examples of what it would mean for this gymnastics coach with her large group of 50 elite performers. In other words, I've done that. Equally, I've performed the skill of explaining why, because this means, therefore, comma, this is the skill I need to represent. Look how important the word because is when you explain why. It's so important. I mean, in many ways, I don't want to make this statement because I don't want to limit you in your writing, but if you're asked to explain why something happens, pretty much because is all you need. You know, it happens because. Why does XYZ happen? Because. And then you answer. It doesn't take much more than that. But without you understanding that explaining why includes you making because statements, you could end up describing or stating or identifying something. We have to explain why if we're asked to do that. Okay, I think that's enough from me. I really feel like I rushed through that last question. You may want to drag back on the DVR if you're on demand, just have a look at the question in its own right and take a little bit more time over it. But as we're on the live show and time's a little bit short, I'll leave it there.
Wasn't quite ready there. It can be a rush. Doing that. But there you go. Never mind. Okay, where are we?
Right, we've got a question. Can you please, James, recap what favorableness is, and give an example, please?
Okay, so favorableness relates to 3 factors. Okay, so I'm trying to remember exactly which exam board cover feed. Hang on a second. I'm meant to have this handy all the time, but sometimes I click away from it. So the following, just be aware that UAQA, EdXL and WJC guys, you need to think about Fiedler basically as an alternative or as a contingency model of leadership. It basically means that you flex and react to the situation, right? That's what, it's not dissimilar to Shaladra in that way. So what favorableness is considered to be is effectively 3 things. So one is how strong is the leader? Okay, so the leader's position, to what degree is that strong? Secondly, how complex is the task? Okay, is it a highly complex thing or is it something which is simple and clearly understood by the group? And thirdly, what are the group relations, the dynamics between the members? So in a favorable situation, you'd have very, very strong group relations. People, intercommunication was good, personal relationships were good, there was understanding, shared identity, those kind of things. Secondly, the task, no matter how complex it was understood by the group. The simpler the better, to make it more obvious. And finally, if we've got a strong leader position, that's a favourable situation, and then everything coming down from that is less and less favourable down to an unfavourable situation. And Fiedler's basic argument was that if you have a very favourable situation, strong leader, simple task, group relations very strong, or if you have an unfavourable situation, which is weak leader, complex task, and group relations are poor, these 2 extremes require that we have autocracy or task-oriented approach. If you've got a moderately favourable situation, like the situation is relatively clear or it's a bit complex but not too complex, if the leader's position is so-and-so strength and the group relations are mixed, then democracy might work better. But at the extremes, then autocracy would work in a better situation. So that's what we mean by favourableness. It's actually a technical term and you'd have to understand it in a technical way. Let me be clear on this side though. Favourableness is not we won our last game, we're top of the league, we're winning every week, whatever. It's not that. Although that could contribute to something like the leader's strength, the group relations, it's not directly that. So yeah.
Brilliant. And to finish with, we've got a picture sent by Lauren.
Lauren, good. So we had Lauren and Bethany, two of our stars of revision, I think.
With their beautiful notes, as you were
I'm trying to
advocating.
see in more detail. Can you show me the Twitter at the inside of? Yeah. Okay. So
you were advocating earlier about good, nice, clean notes.
Yes.
So here we've got a nice
two excellent examples.
Yes.
If I was being super harsh,
colours.
Yeah, but that's just Jane. That's just my opinion. You might find it's different for you. Highlighters are kind of useful too, huh? So that's another model. Our daughter, uses a lot of highlighters in her revision. She has they're really pretty notes. Their effectiveness, I'm pretty good as well, right? Just in case you haven't realised, Marta and I, we share a number of contracts together. So we own a business together, which is kind of what we're doing today. We own a home together, this kind of stuff.
We own 2 children together.
We own 2 children together. So we have a number of contracts together in our lives. So it's, when I say our children, that's what I mean. Yes.
Brilliant.
Any other questions?
No. I think that's it for today.
Okay, cool. So I should wish you all a very good evening. I'm recording a podcast this evening with, I'm not going to say with who, but a very, very well-known character in the field of education, and we're going to be publishing that later in the week. And then tomorrow I'm off to Kings Lynn in Norfolk, where I'm presenting at an award ceremony for a school that works with us on a regular basis. I'm really looking forward to that. I've got to make a speech though, and I'm going to be honest with you. You lot tell me, what do children at a sports awards event, what do they want their guest to, what is it they want to hear? I'm really nervous about it. I'm not really nervous. I don't get nervous really about anything.
I would say whatever it is, not for very long.
Keep it short. That probably is the key. You're right. So yeah, if you've got any ideas, you teenagers out there, of what I could say at a sports awards dinner, because I'm really nervous. I've had loads of ideas. In fact, I actually showed you some of my notes from my ideas earlier by mistake. But yeah, I don't know what to say, so I'm doing that. And then on Friday, I can sort of relax a little bit because we don't have a revision session now until next week. On Friday, I'm actually visiting the Department for Education to record a podcast as well with someone who's very high up in education in the UK. So it's kind of exciting few days. So I'm looking forward to it. Bit of a change up. Anyway, I'm rambling on. I wish you all a very, very good evening. Martha's nodding. I wish you a good evening. Study hard. Get those questions answered. Get subscribed to the YouTube channel. Have a great evening. Take care.
The traditional classroom environment doesn't suit everyone. Students that don't fit this pace of learning begin to lose confidence. The problem is, the current learning model has holes in it. Luckily, the EverLearner.com is here to fill those holes. With the EverLearner Classroom, each student is given a chance to master each subject at their own pace. With thousands of video tutorials and tens of thousands of automated questions on the site, students can progress at their own individual pace. And because every interaction is tracked within the site, teachers can review students' progress and gain access to razor-sharp data. Teachers will have more time to engage with small groups and be better informed of where their time and support is needed. With the EverLearner, teachers can leave the traditional model behind and become facilitators, coaches, and inspirers. There's a reason we have over 100,000 registered students. To learn more, visit our website today.